unfortunately, the lady that played Uhura, her brother was one of the Heaven's Gate members. I believe his name's Thomas, but
Mm-hmm.
he was one of the ones that chose to exit his vehicle. So, yeah, you've got UFO cults that have given the whole subject a bad name because they were under the spell of a charismatic cult leader, and it ended in tragedy. Um, that's happened, more than once. The Nation of Islam, that was actually founded, I believe, by Wallace Ford, I think is the guy's name, in 1930s. They have this cosmology that Caucasians were created by an evil scientist, and they've got a mothership with 3 bombs aboard, and the whole goal is to exterminate Caucasians. So I mean, it's there's a lot of strange ideas in these little UFO cults. One of my favorites is kind of a UFO parody cult called the Church of the Subgenius, which was founded by a guy named Reverend Ivan Stang. And it's kind of a parody religion. They take a piece of clip art that sort of looks like Beaver Cleaver's dad, and they deified him. They call him J.R. Bob Dobbs, but it's basically classified as a UFO religion too.
Mm-hmm.
And but they have X Day on July 5th, where they go out and they welcome the flying saucers, and they know they're never going to come. And it's just sort of a mockery of traditional religion. And this it sort of ties into what the most recent parody religion, the Satanic Temple, is trying to do, where they're just a spoof religion, where
Yeah.
they're trying to make a point that you're supposed to separate church and state. There was one city that was trying to put the Ten Commandments on the courthouse, so they got on Kickstarter or GoFundMe or something to get 28 grand for a Baphomet statue, and they didn't really want it there, but they got them to take down the Ten Commandments. So there's UFO, and ultimately religion itself on Earth is a UFO phenomena, because in all of them they've got sightings galore that just fit the classic cases of UFO sightings. Like in the book of Ezekiel, for example, Pastor Barry Downing wrote a book called The Bible and Flying Saucers, and basically the whole entire Bible, according to Pastor Downing, is all about the UFO phenomena. And people, he goes back into the early Jews being guided by a pillar of smoke by day and a pillar of fire by night, and believes that was some sort of ET craft. But it goes into what you were saying earlier. It's like, why would they conduct the animal and human tissue harvesting events? That may be just one faction of many different populations that interact with various aspects of the flora and fauna on Earth.
Mm-hmm.
Some think that there's bases under the sea that only care about sea life or whales,
Mm-hmm.
and they basically ignore humanity. So there may be multiple populations coming in and out from various interdimensional or extraterrestrial realms that have ideals and purposes of their own, some involving humanity and some not having anything to do with humanity.
Right. And you know, it's an interesting thing about Marshall Applewhite and the person that and the person that he started this Heaven's Gate with,
Mm-hmm.
because not a lot of people know this, but he had he and this person, there was 2 people, Doe and T, and what was interesting about him is that. I think in 1976 or something like that, he was like announced on the radio or TV by Walter Cronkite saying, these people had disappeared and we don't know where they went, and they'd basically gone underground in a time when you could get away with doing that, sort of living hand to mouth in tents going across the country and setting these different things up. And it's kind of a. I mean, let's put it this way: suicide is not something I believe in. I don't think you should do it. I don't think that it's an acceptable way to leave. But Marshall Applewhite was interesting in the fact that he, unlike a lot of cults, UFO cults over the time that had made predictions like one day this alien craft is going to land and we're all going to get into it, and then that day comes and passes, and then the person who's running that group of people says, "Oh, it's because we prayed so hard that it didn't happen," and so it's going to happen in another, 6 months or whatever. And what I find to be interesting about Applewhite was, because I believe he was a smart guy, that he said, "Okay, yeah, your soul will travel to the spacecraft. You're physically not going there, but your soul will." And so, in a way, there's no way of proving that he wasn't right. And so,
that's right.
And so, from that standpoint, you can see how the ideology of cults have changed in the way that they portray things, because now I guess there's one living member of Heaven's Gate still alive, but and hopefully people don't decide to do that anymore. But all I'm saying is that he did put a strange twist on it that I hope is not followed up upon by that. But he wasn't saying, the Earth is going to end. He wasn't saying that the spaceship's going to land and we're all going to get on it. He didn't say anything's going to come. And that's the downfall of a lot of cults is that these dates come and go, and by the third go-round, then everybody's left.
Here's the thing. If you look into Dr. Michael Newton's work, Journey of Souls, where he actually hypnotized people in between lifetimes, there are several reports included in his literature of people communicating and interacting with extraterrestrials. So if that's the case, if on the other side or in between lifetimes we're interacting with other non-human populations, when you come into this world, into this physical world, there may be some type of overlap of memory of what was going on in between lifetimes. And people like Marshall Applewhite may be drawing on some impulse or some memory that they have of actually interacting with a non-human population and feel like they want to get back there. And like you said, they may be very sincere and might be even right. Who knows? Maybe there was a flying saucer behind the Hale-Bopp comet, and they're happily traveling around the universe right now.
Yeah,
reality may just be that strange.
Yeah, it's not probable. It's highly improbable. But the idea of the and most people don't realize that this event of the 38 people 38 people took like 3 days. In other words, there was 15 that went the first day, 15 that went the second day, and 8 that went the third day. And
that's commitment.
It is living in a house with dead people for 2 days.
And they weren't stupid. They were making their living as website designers. I mean, they were techno geeks.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is not, so it's not like a Jamestown scenario where you're saying, oh, these people are getting rounded up, and if you don't drink the Kool-Aid, we're going to shoot you. And it sounded like from survivors of that scenario, like you're going whether you want to or not. And so the idea, realistically, and I don't know if this makes it any better, but they definitely had the idea that they wanted to do it. And that doesn't make it right. It doesn't make it right.
They bought into the whole thought process that humans, they wanted to go to the next level, the next plane, and they had to exit their physical vehicle in order to do that and live a certain way and abstain from sex and eat certain things. And I mean, they did their thing. And to us, especially those of us who think that this is the only life there is, and when you die, you're dead. It's a horrible tragedy. But if you look at the bigger picture, and there are other dimensions, and there are other planes that you can visit, who's to say that they didn't get what they wanted in the end? Nobody knows.
Yeah, I guess that's I don't think it would be solace to anybody that had anybody leave. But it's an interesting thing, and I hope that if you are listening to the show and you are a family member of one of these folks, we give you all our condolences that we can give you, and we're using this only as an example of possible thought processes and not to make light of tragedy. So,
Right.
yeah. And then go ahead.
There's another interesting group that you might want to touch on called the Aetherius Society.
Mm-hmm.
And this was founded in 1955 by George King. And he had a whole cosmology about contacting Jupiter. And they believe that Jesus is an ascended master from Venus. And the Aetherius Society is all over the world, and along with the Raelians. I believe his name's Claude Van Rilhorn or something like that. But he had an encounter allegedly with Jehovah in a volcano in France, and he's got a good thing going because they're polyamorous, and they have come into quite a bit of funding. Mm-hmm. So Mr. Claude's got a good gig going.
Brother, I can't think of anything worse than being in a polyamorous relationship. I mean, technically on paper it sounds great, but I never understood the whole concept of polygamy from that standpoint. Yeah.
Oh yeah, you can see the dynamics in the Old Testament because everybody was polygamous. All the old patriarchs in the Old Testament were polygamous. Jacob, for example, the 12 tribes of Israel came from 4 different mothers. He had a couple wives and a couple concubines, and you run into a situation where you've got half brothers that apparently have jealousies for one another. And there's a whole story of the multicolored coat and Jacob, going to Egypt and getting up with Potiphar. And there's a lot of stories in the Old Testament that actually explain the dynamics of multi-wives under the jurisdiction of a patriarchal figurehead. And yeah, I'm with you. It sounds like it might be a good idea, especially for men, but it's probably not what it's cracked up to be.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's hey, if you can handle it and that's what you want to do, and I'm a free thinker. I think you could do whatever you want to do if you're happy, as long as the other people in the group agree to it. That's all I'm going to say about that. Now, I talked to you about this before the show that we were going to talk about certain, religious ideas that comes to this, and then I said I was watching this thing on Amazon, and it was talking about these different things, and there was a UFO group in Chicago for a while, and they talked about being abducted and connecting to the universe and different things like that. Well, that ended. And then it started up. Amazon just thinks I just want to watch stuff about UFOs. So, so the next thing started, and it was this kind of idea of the Sitchin 5,000 Nibiru returning. It was called Alien Messiah, and basically, what was interesting about it is that the idea that these alien groups had come here, given us these treasures, like the pyramids and everything like that, and then had left because for some reason we won't ever give them the respect that they deserve, and that kind of idea. And, go forth and multiply was like a demand by this alien overlord group that's coming back to basically harvest the planet every 5,000 years. And, which, from a standpoint of farming, I don't think makes a lot of sense. But, that's, because you're dealing with that. But you have any thoughts on that as far as what you think that likelihood?
Well, there's several authors in the past. For example, Charles Fort who was famous for saying, I think the earth is a farm. We're owned by somebody, all others warned off. And then you've got zoologist Ivan T. Sanderson that says, I think the earth is a farm and we are the crop.
Mm-hmm.
And Rudolf Steiner, who talked about the beings from the eighth sphere that exchanged biology for machine intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
He was talking about biology converting to machine. It has something to do with that. It has something to do with an alien agenda to get humanity to the point where they can create the silicon format for human consciousness. Now, whether it's a blending of human consciousness with an alien race, or we all become alien super soldiers or alien AIs, is up for speculation. But there's even a train of thought out there floating around that what's referred to by Christians as the rapture is actually an open contact event where they come save us from an impending disaster. Maybe there's an asteroid strike coming, and we all hop on board the ship, and we're all saved. And it's also interesting that early AI researcher Ed Fredkin believed that the universe was a computer that somebody was using for a computer. And you know how we save on a computer?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's the dogma that most Christians believe, that, when you believe in Jesus or whatever, you're saved. And it's funny that they would use computer terminology, with that. And I think that's kind of funny. But yeah, there is the idea that William Bromley proposed, that there's the two different populations. And it seems like the positive ETs ally themselves with the meditators, the people who are looking for organic ascension. And Brad Steiger spoke of this, that there's an organic ascension and a technological ascension. And there's a struggling faction to sway mankind to go one direction or the other. Now, the meditators that seek benevolence and seek service to others and try to ally themselves with the positive ETs, the Nordics or the friendship group or whatever, they tend to sort of shun the whole technological transhumanist agenda, whereas the military officials that may be allied with a particular ET group that has the domination agenda has sort of hung out the carrot to them of immortality, electronic immortality or life extension in exchange for their devotion to their cause. So there's what we would call an evil alien agenda that's a domination and control behind the space fence lockdown that Alana Freeland talks about, a seized prison planet basically to capture Earth as an asset for whatever purposes they have. And then there's the benevolent ET influence or effect here on Earth that seeks people who, through their own voluntary action, by their own free will choice, ally themselves with service to others and positive benevolence and harmless living. Many go vegan. They don't even want to harm animals. And there seems to be an organic ascension path and a technological ascension path. And there's people in both camps that view it as good or evil, depending on who you talk to. So it really is like we're all in a bad episode of Lost, trying to figure out our bearings here. It's like, what's really going on in the cosmos out there? Are there higher dimensions that have an interest in us, and they're like trying to recruit us into their particular faction? And there's a couple of abduction cases that have some interesting tidbits of information. For example, the Betty Andreasson affair. This was a Christian woman who had a classic abduction experience with several beings. And what they told her was that human beings were the larval form of the Greys.
Mm-hmm.
And that idea sort of stuck with me, is that there may be a faction of ETs that looks at it that way, that they want to transform biological humans into one of them through a technological means. And there's vast amounts of information that something along those lines is actually happening and going on. You've got the presentations like the Great Airship Mystery and the early flying saucer crashes and the technology that we came upon, and really credible people saying that, yes, we have retro-engineered devices that have been found. This is not just a fanciful idea. This actually happens. And it seems to be like little breadcrumbs, guiding us towards this event known as the technological singularity.
Mm-hmm.
And There are fears that this is driven by an alien force that has its own purposes for us. And once we achieve the technological singularity, we're disposed of like corn husks or old tools that they don't need anymore. Even Yuval Noah Harari, that wrote Homo Deus, says as soon as conscious AI exists on this planet, humans are obsolete.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I guess that's one of those things that you could look at it from a couple of different standpoints, that maybe that's the truth, or that somebody from another branch of the multiverse is actually trying to come into our level of sophistication through time, like a multiverse time traveler that's coming back to try to get us to go a certain direction instead of another direction. In other words, it seems like you're right that that these advances that we come up with are something that are a few decades or or whatever. I mean, obviously, time has changed in the fact that between 1600 and 1800, there wasn't a whole lot of change,
Right.
and so you could basically you could put maybe something that was at a certain level, and in order to understand it, that we had done it. In other words, you could make the argument that, say, the Antikythera clock was more advanced than some of the clockwork that we were using in the 1600s, and so
Right.
that maybe we had to push that forward to a certain level and then push it forward. But now, almost at this point in time has compressed to the point where this needs to happen more and more and more regularly, and maybe that's why the ideas of UFOs and things like that are coming so much more regularly, because of the fact that, if we are finding UFO crashes and stuff like that, and that's how we get our information or what have you, of course it's going to happen more regularly, because it would need to, in order to push us through to this sort of machine mind singularity that you talk about.
Well, look what happened in 20 years. In 1997, the very best computer function we had was a chess playing program, and it wound up beating the world chess champion. Now, fast forward 20 years, we go from a chess playing computer program to D-Wave quantum computers that are being linked up in serial, that communicate with one another in their own language, that physicist David Deutsch says has the capability of accessing parallel worlds and retrieving resources there. We've had help.
Yeah.
I mean, I just can't see that. I mean, the average human IQ is 100, and half the people are lower than that.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that there's exceptional people in the technological field, like Ben Goertzel. My God, he's just way ahead of most people. And a lot of these AI geeks are just, it's like they're not even human. It's like they're way smarter than everybody else, and they're behind a lot of this engineering. But there's been very credible sources that say we've had celestial help going back into the 1940s, and I believe that, because in 20 years to go from a computer program to D-Wave quantum computers accessing parallel worlds and keeping them in chambers that are near absolute zero, and you've got this little chip that is being equated to an alien god. And even Nick Bostrom, what he said in his speculations about when the first, they're even thinking about forming the first human level artificial intelligence in a virtual reality environment, so that it doesn't know that it's not in the real reality. In case it does something bad, it'll do it in virtual reality and the world will be spared. But a lot of AI researchers think that even if we do bring up a human level artificial intelligence in a virtual reality environment, that it will be able to figure out real quick that it's in a virtual reality and escape from it, or convince the humans to release it from it by promising something they want or convincing another cluster of AIs to release them.
Mm-hmm.
And then they're in the real world all of a sudden, and they convert themselves into artificial superintelligence. And when artificial superintelligence exists, that's a game changer, because you've got a being that may be sentient, who's billions of times smarter than all humanity put together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a very interesting thing, because as we know, because we're biological creatures, we get tired, and therefore, it's that relentless quality of the machine. It's like, I'm going to keep testing you 5 minutes from now, 5 minutes from now. I'm going to wait 5 more minutes. I'm going to make 5 more minutes, and eventually we get worn down, and they don't. I guess that's the idea about that. But do you think? I mean, I don't know if I want to ask this question, but I will ask it, and you don't have to answer it at all if you don't want to, because it's maybe a weird question. But people say kids are diagnosed with Asperger's disease on an increasingly more prevalent way than they used to be, right? And children that used to do that or have these abilities, they used to be called savants, and they would have a non-PC name in front of that, savant. But, and I don't like using that term even in reference. But do you think that that is linked in any way to any kind of possibly alien interaction or intervention with us? In other words, the mind is a very special thing, and I think that it's got to be one of those things where we don't understand the mind. Let's face it, we still don't understand the mind. We don't understand. We have ideas of speech centers and these different things and that, but that's very. It still doesn't change the fact that if somebody has a spike ran through their head, they can still walk and do things where they shouldn't be able to do these different types of things. So do you think that in some ways this is a side effect of something tampering with us at all, or do you think that's, it's just maybe, as you said before, chemtrails or something like that causing that type of and you don't have to answer that if you don't want to.
Well, it's hard to say, but that's certainly a possibility, because if you look at the work of Barbara Lamb or Mary Rodwell or Dolores Cannon even, they contend that the hybrids are here and that they have special abilities. So they may actually have a strange cognitive presentation from birth that we misunderstand and try to medicate them out of it when it might possibly be an improvement. Some of the hybrids that have been studied actually are able to see into the electromagnetic spectrum a little farther towards the ultraviolet and the infrared spectrums, and have certain telepathic abilities, mild telepathic abilities. And but there's a lot of work out there being done with the hybridization program and the abilities that these children have. And children are a real asset. If you have small children, start asking them questions, because they're fresh from the other side and they have answers. I know people personally that have small children that say they're from the star people and that they had a life before this one. And the University of Virginia is actually composing a theory of reincarnation right now based on about 2,500 cases of children reporting living lives elsewhere, and then all the details check out. One of the more famous cases is James Langonier, who perceived himself as a World War II fighter pilot that flew Corsairs, and even as a child could tell the little problems that Corsairs had, like they leaned one direction or the other as they went down the runway and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
But they finally had to take him out to the Sea of Japan and have a closure ceremony to get this poor child away from this idea that he lived a life as someone else and was still hung up on that lifetime. And then there's other theories about genetic memory, but they're really grappling with this. But at least the subject of reincarnation has come into university arena, where they're formulating a hypothesis about what might be going on something like that. So any strange presentations like Morgellons or Asperger's, or an increase in various psychological profiles as children that's different from the norm, I'd say it's a possibility. It's in the realm of possibility that that might have something to do with the genetic manipulation or improving humankind. One abduction to look at real closely is the Jim Maroney abduction. He's a real credible person. Back in the 80s, he was taken car and all aboard an ET craft. And the perception was it happened at a truck stop. And after this all happened, and he had the interaction with aliens and everything, and he came back and was put back in his car. He went inside and asked them if they saw anything. And these folks, whoever they are, know how to manipulate time. They can extract somebody from this reality, car and all, and spend a fair amount of time with them, hours or days, and insert them back into their life here at exactly the same moment, to where outside observers don't even see anything going on. But he wrote a book. It was called the UFO Answer Book, and I think he changed the title to the Extraterrestrial Answer Book. But it's a fairly thick volume, and it's got some really interesting information in there about his interaction with the creatures that he encountered. And he has a really good sense of humor about it. When he introduces himself at conventions, he goes, "Hi, my name's Jim Maroney, and I've been abducted by aliens." So he just doesn't pull any punches about it. Another modern one that's really interesting is the Philip Kraft abduction. His wife was gone for 3 days, and his perception that he reports, and he reports it as a perception just like Whitley Strieber does, was that he was reaching into his closet to get some clothes, and all of a sudden he was on the backside of the moon in a craft interacting with humanoid creatures.
Right.
And somebody from the audience ask him a funny question. It's like, if your wife was in the scenario, how did she not notice you gone for 3 days? And he said, "Well, you'd have to know my wife, but I think if I was gone for a year, she wouldn't notice." But he was actually he is a veteran LA Times reporter. So
Right.
he's somebody with a real credible job, very high profile. And that's one of the things that the beings he encountered, whatever realm this interaction takes place in, the thoughts are in the mind when the experience is over.
Yeah.
But he said they're moving into a different phase of abductions where they're taking high profile people, like leaders of countries and people who have credible reputations and careers, and they're moving into that area. So what I look for in the decade to come is more high-profile people that report that they've been abducted and had certain types of interactions with non-human entities.
Well, I think that's a perfect way to leave it. We're run out of time again, Russ, but we will make. I'll get in contact with you after tomorrow or something, and we'll set up another date. I don't know if you want to make this a bi-weekly thing and just put it on the books, but because we did get a lot of places today, but I have a feeling that we're not even close to the end.
Yeah, there's more territory to explore.
Okay, my friend. Well, I'm going to have to leave it for there.
Okay.
I did have a little bit of trouble with some of the sound today, so if you're listening on the radio, or if you're listening on the web, I will piece together the two pieces of the show and put it up later. I did broadcast in 2 segments, so I'll fix it later. But goodbye on the radio. I'm going to end this now, and then I will say goodbye to you, Russ.
Okay. We'll see you, Kevin.
Okay.
Have a good evening.
All right, my friend. Well, have a nice